It didn't make sense at first. How could someone be denied access to a floor that quietly depended on her existence to function? Yet that's exactly what happened at 9:12 a.m. on a glass-wrapped executive level 30 floors above downtown Manhattan when a security guard stepped forward, palm raised, and said with practiced certainty, "Step back. This floor isn't for people like you." The words didn't echo, they landed, heavy, final, like a rule that had never been questioned. Angela Brooks didn't stop walking immediately, not because she didn't hear him, but because she had heard versions of that sentence her entire life, dressed in different tones, wearing different uniforms, always meaning the same thing. She slowed, then turned her head slightly, her expression unreadable, her posture calm in a way that made the silence around her feel intentional. The executive floor was everything it was designed to be: quiet, polished, controlled. Frosted glass offices lined the corridor. Soft gray carpet muted every step. People moved with purpose but spoke in low voices, as if success required a certain volume. And then there was Angela, no badge clipped to her blazer, no assistant trailing behind, no visible signal that she belonged anywhere near the top floor of a billion-dollar company. Just a woman in a tailored navy jacket, dark jeans, and low heels that made no sound as she stood there, looking at a man who had already decided who she was. "Ma'am, I need you to use the main lobby," the guard added, firmer now, gesturing toward the elevators behind her as if redirecting her would restore order to the space. A receptionist glanced up from her desk, eyes narrowing just enough to register concern, not for Angela, but for the disruption. Two executives near the conference suite slowed their pace, exchanging a look that said everything without a word. Angela's gaze moved across the room, not searching for help, not seeking approval, just observing, cataloging, understanding. "Run my name," she said finally, her voice even, controlled, almost quiet enough to be ignored if it weren't for the weight behind it. The guard didn't move. "I don't need to run anything," he replied, a hint of impatience slipping through. "This area is restricted. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here." Now, back to Angela Brooks. She didn't argue. Didn't raise her voice. Instead, she took a single step forward, not aggressive, not hesitant, just enough to shift the balance of the moment. That's when the second voice entered, sharper, colder. "Is there a problem here?" A white male manager in a tailored charcoal suit approached, his expression already aligned with the guard's version of reality. He didn't ask Angela what she needed. He didn't ask her name. He looked at her the way people look at something out of place. "She's trying to access the executive floor," the guard said, almost relieved to pass the situation upward. The manager nodded once, then looked directly at Angela. "This level requires clearance," he said. "If you have business here, you'll need to schedule it properly." There it was again, not loud, not explicit, but unmistakable. "You don't belong." Angela held his gaze, her face still, her breathing steady, the air around her tightening in ways no one could quite explain. Somewhere behind the glass walls, a door clicked shut. Somewhere near the elevators, someone stopped pretending not to watch. And right there, in the quiet center of a space built on hierarchy and control, a decision had already been made, just not by the people who thought they were in charge. Angela did not look up as she placed the phone to her ear, not because she was avoiding them, but because she had already moved past them, mentally, strategically, as if the conversation happening around her no longer held authority over what came next. "Claire," she said, her voice low but precise, each syllable measured, "I need a full access audit on executive level 30, immediate." There was no explanation, no hesitation, just instruction, and on the other end, Claire did not ask questions, she never did, understood, came the reply, sharp and efficient, the kind of response built on trust earned over years, not minutes. Angela ended the call just as quietly as she had made it, lowering the phone to her side, her expression unchanged, as if she had simply checked the time. The manager let out a short breath, one that sounded almost like a laugh, but lacked any real amusement, that is not how this works, he said, folding his arms now, shifting into a stance that suggested finality. You cannot just call someone and override security protocols. Angela's eyes met his again, calm, unwavering. Watch me, she said, and the words did not rise, they settled, heavy and certain, like something already in motion. A second passed, then another, and at first, nothing happened. The hallway remained still, the glass walls reflected the same composed faces. The receptionist glanced back at her screen, attempting to return to normal, but then it began. Subtle, almost invisible, the security panel beside the elevator doors flickered once, a soft blink that might have been ignored if not for the second one that followed, longer this time, more deliberate. The guard noticed it first, his posture tightening as he turned toward the panel, his hand instinctively moving to his badge, as if proximity alone could stabilize the system. A faint tone echoed, not loud, but distinct enough to break the silence. The kind of sound that did not belong in a place designed for seamless operation. The manager glanced over, irritation flashing across his face. Probably a minor system refresh, he said quickly, more to himself than anyone else, but the words did not settle the room. They exposed something else, uncertainty, because executive floors did not glitch, not here, not like this. Across the corridor, one of the glass office doors unlocked with a soft click, then locked again, as if responding to an unseen command. The receptionist's fingers froze above her keyboard as her screen refreshed without input, her eyes widening just slightly before she caught herself. The guard stepped toward the panel now, swiping his badge across the reader. Once, then again, the usual green confirmation light did not appear. Instead, a muted amber glow replaced it, steady, unresponsive. That is not right, he muttered under his breath. The manager's attention snapped fully to the system now, his confidence thinning at the edges. Try it again, he instructed, but the guard already had a third swipe. Slower this time, more deliberate, as if precision could force compliance. Nothing changed, the amber light held, unwavering. The air shifted, not dramatically, but enough for the people watching to feel it, enough for the silence to carry weight instead of control. Angela remained exactly where she was, not watching the panel, not reacting to the change, because she did not need to see it to know it was happening. She had already set it in motion. The manager took a step toward her again, but this time it was not to assert authority, it was to regain footing. What did you just do? He asked, and for the first time, the question did not sound like an accusation, it sounded like a realization arriving too late. Angela's gaze shifted past him, toward the corridor, toward the doors, toward the system itself. I did not do anything, she said softly, then paused just long enough for the truth to settle in the space between them. I just stopped it from pretending you were in control. The silence did not break all at once, it fractured, slowly, like something controlled beginning to slip beyond its design. The amber light on the security panel remained steady, unmoved by repeated attempts, and now it was not just the guard who noticed, it was everyone. The executives who had paused earlier were no longer pretending to walk, they stood still, watching openly, their conversations abandoned mid-sentence. The receptionist leaned closer to her monitor, refreshing her screen again and again as if repetition could restore order, but the system did not respond the way it was supposed to. It hesitated, it lagged, it questioned, and that alone was enough to change the temperature of the room. The manager straightened his posture again, trying to reclaim something that was already slipping. This is a temporary glitch, he said, louder this time, directing his voice outward as if addressing the entire floor. Not just Angela, all systems undergo routine checks, but no one answered, because everyone could see it. This was not routine, this was something else, something precise, something targeted. The guard tried his badge again, slower, more careful, pressing it flat against the reader as if pressure could force recognition. The reader remained silent, the amber light unchanged, his jaw tightened, his confidence thinning with each failed attempt. It is not reading, he admitted quietly, almost to himself. And that admission, small as it was, landed harder than anything said so far, because it was the first crack spoken out loud. Across the hall another employee approached the glass door of a conference room, tapping her access card against the panel, once, twice, then a third time. The usual green flash never came. She frowned, stepping back, glancing around as if someone might explain it, but no one did, because no one understood it yet. except one person. Angela did not move, she did not watch them struggle, she did not offer clarification, she simply stood there, her presence now anchoring the entire moment, not as an intruder, but as something far more unsettling, a constant. The manager turned back to her, this time without the earlier confidence, without the rehearsed tone. "If you have interfered with company systems," he began, but the sentence did not finish the way he intended, because even as he spoke, the elevator behind him chimed, the doors sliding open with mechanical precision, revealing a panel inside that flickered once before stabilizing. The guard instinctively stepped toward it, attempting to badge in, but the panel did not respond to him. Instead, it remained locked in a neutral state, waiting, not for him, but for something else, something higher. The manager's voice faltered for a fraction of a second, and that was all it took. The illusion of control, once cracked, does not repair itself easily. "This floor requires authorized access," he repeated, but now it sounded different, not like a rule, but like a reminder he was trying to convince himself of. Angela finally shifted her weight slightly, the smallest movement, but it drew every eye back to her. She glanced at the elevator, then back at the manager, her expression calm, almost indifferent, as if what was happening was expected. "Inevitable even." "You keep saying that," she said quietly, her voice steady. "But you have not asked the only question that matters." The manager frowned, his brow tightening. "And what is that?" he asked, the edge in his voice dulled now, replaced with something closer to uncertainty. Angela held his gaze for a moment longer, letting the silence stretch just enough to settle into everyone listening. "Who decides what authorized means?" she said, and the words did not echo, they anchored, heavy and precise. And for the first time since this began, no one moved, because somewhere between the flickering systems and the failing access cards, the answer had already started to change. No one answered her question because no one in that moment could, not with certainty, not anymore. The word authorized had always lived comfortably in policy manuals and access badges, in quiet approvals and invisible hierarchies, but now it hung in the air like something unstable, something shifting. The manager opened his mouth as if to respond, but nothing came out right away, and that hesitation, brief as it was, did more damage than any argument could have, because it showed doubt, and doubt did not belong on this floor, not here, not in front of everyone. A soft chime echoed again from the elevator, but this time it was followed by something new, a faint system tone, sharper, more deliberate, the kind that signaled a change rather than an error. The receptionist's screen refreshed once more, but instead of returning to normal, it displayed a restricted access notice across multiple tabs. Her fingers pulled back from the keyboard as if the system itself had drawn a line she could not cross. "What is happening?" she whispered, not to anyone in particular, but loud enough for the uncertainty to spread. Across the hall, another employee attempted to enter a secured office, her badge hovering near the reader, waiting for the familiar green confirmation. It never came. Instead the panel dimmed slightly, as if rejecting the request without explanation. She stepped back, her confusion visible now, no longer masked by professionalism. The guard looked between the failing panels and the manager, waiting for instruction, for clarity, for anything that would restore the structure he relied on, but the manager did not give it, not immediately, because his attention had shifted completely, not to the system, but to Angela. "You said you called someone," he said slowly, his voice measured, cautious now. "Who exactly did you call?" The question landed differently than the ones before, not dismissive, not authoritative, but searching. Angela did not answer right away. She let the silence settle again, let the weight of the moment press into the room, because the answer itself was not the point. The realization was, a junior analyst standing near the glass corridor finally spoke, her voice hesitant but clear enough to cut through the tension. I think the system is locking us out," she said, glancing at her own badge, then at the panel beside her. "It is not just him," she added, nodding toward the guard, "it is all of us." That was the shift, the moment the room stopped seeing this as an isolated glitch and started understanding it as something wider, something intentional. The manager's expression tightened, his control slipping further with every second. "That is not possible," he said quickly, but even he did not sound convinced, because the evidence was everywhere now, doors that would not open, badges that would not scan, systems that no longer responded the way they were designed to. Angela finally moved again, just one step, slow, deliberate, enough to place herself slightly closer to the center of the space, not invading it, but claiming it without announcement. It is possible, she said quietly, her voice steady, when the system stops recognizing the wrong people. The words did not accuse, they clarified, and that distinction made them harder to ignore. The manager exhaled slowly, running a hand across his jaw as if trying to piece together a version of reality that still made sense. You are saying this is targeted? He asked, and now there was no edge left in his tone, only the need to understand. Angela met his gaze, unwavering. I am saying, she replied, her voice calm but absolute, that access was never yours to control, and somewhere in that statement, something shifted completely, because for the first time since this began, the room was no longer waiting for the system to fix itself, it was waiting for her to finish what she had started. The room did not return to normal because normal had already been replaced by something else, something quieter but far more powerful, the kind of shift that does not announce itself but changes everything beneath it. The manager looked around now, not as someone in control, but as someone trying to find where control had gone. His eyes moved from the frozen access panels to the employees standing uncertainly near locked doors, to the receptionist who had stopped typing entirely, and finally back to Angela, who had not raised her voice once, had not moved more than a few steps, yet had somehow altered the entire structure of the floor. This needs to be escalated to corporate, he said. But the statement lacked authority, it sounded delayed, like a response that should have come minutes earlier. Angela's expression did not change, but there was a slight shift in her posture, a quiet acknowledgement that the word corporate had finally entered the conversation. It already has been, she replied, her tone even, controlled, as if she were stating something obvious. The manager frowned, confusion tightening his features. By who? He asked, and this time the question did not carry resistance, only the need to understand what he had missed. Angela did not answer immediately, instead she glanced toward the far end of the corridor, where a large glass door led to a private boardroom, a space reserved for decisions that shaped everything beneath this floor. The door remained closed, its access panel dark, unresponsive, but then, almost on cue, a soft click echoed through the space, subtle but unmistakable, the lock disengaging, the door shifting open just an inch, enough to break the line between restricted and accessible. Every eye turned toward it, because that door did not open without reason, not without authorization from the highest level. The manager's breath caught slightly, not dramatic, but enough to reveal the moment he realized this was no longer contained, this was no longer a misunderstanding at the security level, this had moved beyond him entirely. That room is secured, he said, almost reflexively, as if stating it could still make it true. Angela took a step in that direction, calm, unhurried, her heels soft against the carpet, each step measured, deliberate, the kind that did not seek permission because it did not require it. The guard instinctively moved as if to block her path again, but he stopped himself halfway, his body hesitating between action and awareness, because something had changed, something he could not name but could no longer ignore. Angela passed him without resistance, without acknowledgement. Not dismissing him, but moving beyond the need to engage. The manager turned quickly, following a step behind, his voice lower now, controlled but strained. You cannot just walk in there, he said, but the sentence did not land the way it once would have. It lacked certainty, it lacked the structure it depended on. Angela reached the door and placed her hand lightly against it, not pushing, just resting there for a moment, as if confirming something only she could feel. Then she looked back over her shoulder, her gaze steady, composed. You are still thinking in terms of permission, she said quietly, and the words carried more weight than any raised voice could have. The manager stopped a few feet behind her, his posture no longer squared, no longer certain, just present, watching, waiting. Angela pushed the door open fully, revealing the boardroom beyond, a space defined by long polished tables, leather chairs, and silence that carried authority even when empty. She stepped inside without hesitation, and as she crossed that threshold, something settled across the floor behind her, not chaos, not panic, but realization, the kind that arrives slowly but changes everything once it does, because in that moment, the question was no longer whether she belonged there. It was why they ever believed she did not. The boardroom did not react to her presence because rooms like that were not designed to react, they were designed to witness, to hold decisions, to absorb consequences. And as Angela stepped inside, the quiet shifted from neutral to intentional. The long table stretching across the room reflected the soft overhead lighting, untouched, undisturbed, as if waiting for something that had already been set in motion long before anyone outside realized it. Behind her the manager stopped at the threshold, not entering, not retreating, caught in the space between authority and uncertainty, his eyes scanning the room as if expecting someone else to appear, someone who could explain what was happening, someone who could restore the version of control he understood, but no one came, because this moment did not belong to anyone else. Angela moved toward the center of the table, her steps measured, her gaze steady. She did not rush, did not hesitate, she simply took her place as if she had done it 100 times before, and in truth, she had. Just not always in rooms where she was expected to prove it. She placed her phone gently on the polished surface, the sound soft but distinct, a marker, a signal, something that separated what had happened outside from what was about to happen next. The manager finally stepped inside, drawn by something he could not ignore anymore. "Who are you?" he asked, and the question, simple as it was, carried more weight than anything he had said before, because now it was not about procedure, not about policy. It was about identity. Angela did not look at him immediately. Instead she glanced at the empty chairs around the table, each one representing a voice, a vote, a level of authority that had shaped decisions for years. Then she spoke, calm, precise. "I am the one who decides who sits in these chairs," she said, and the words did not rise, they settled, heavy, final. The manager's expression shifted, not fully understanding, but no longer dismissing. "That is not possible," he replied, but the certainty was gone, replaced by something fragile, something that could break with the wrong answer. Angela finally turned to face him, her eyes steady, unwavering. "You said this floor requires clearance," she continued, her voice even. "What you did not realize is that clearance does not come from badges, it comes from ownership." The word ownership lingered, stretching across the room, filling the silence in a way nothing else could. The manager blinked, processing, recalibrating. "You are saying you own this company," he said slowly, as if speaking it out loud might make it less real. Angela did not rush to confirm it, she let the weight of the moment build, let the truth form in his mind before she gave it shape. Then she nodded once, small, controlled. "Not just this company," she said, "this building, this system, this entire executive structure." The words did not sound like a claim, they sounded like a fact, something already documented, already verified. Outside the boardroom, the floor remained still, people watching through the glass, waiting, because even without hearing every word, they could feel it. The shift had reached its peak. Back inside, the manager took a step back, not forced, not dramatic, just instinctive, as if his body had finally caught up to what his mind was beginning to understand. Angela reached for her phone again. Her movements deliberate, controlled. She tapped the screen once, then turned it slightly so it faced him, not aggressively, just enough for him to see. On the display, a live system dashboard pulsed with activity, access levels updating in real time, names shifting, permissions changing, and at the top, above everything else, one name remained fixed, highlighted, unmistakable, Angela Brooks. She let him look at it for a moment, let the realization settle fully before she spoke again. Her voice steady, final. "You stopped me at the door," she said, "but you never asked who built it." The room did not erupt, it did not collapse into chaos, it tightened, as if every surface, every chair, every silent corner of that boardroom had just aligned itself with a truth that could no longer be ignored. The manager stared at the screen, then back at Angela, then again at the name displayed in unmistakable clarity, and in that loop, something inside him shifted, not all at once, but enough to erase the version of this moment where he was in control. "Angela Brooks," he repeated under his breath, as if saying it aloud might change what it meant, but it did not, it only made it more real. Outside the glass walls, the tension spread further. Employees now gathered in quiet clusters, not speaking loudly, but no longer pretending to ignore what was happening. A junior analyst stepped closer to the boardroom door, her eyes fixed on Angela, her expression no longer confused, but aware, as if she had just connected something she had seen before, a name on an internal report, a signature on a company-wide announcement, something distant that had suddenly become present. Inside, the manager took another step back, his posture no longer squared, his authority no longer anchored. "If this is true," he began, but the sentence did not carry through. Because the question itself no longer mattered, truth was already established. Angela did not interrupt him. She did not need to, instead she turned slightly, her gaze moving across the boardroom once more, and in that moment, the space shifted again, not because of what was said, but because of what was remembered, because for Angela, this room was not new, not unfamiliar, but it had not always been this version of it. She remembered a different boardroom, smaller, colder, a place where her voice had once been questioned before it was even heard, where her proposals had been reviewed with skepticism. Not because of their content, but because of who delivered them. She remembered sitting at the far end of a table, waiting for acknowledgement that came slower for her than for others. She remembered the pauses, the glances, the subtle dismissals wrapped in professional language, and she remembered the decision she made in those moments, not to argue louder, not to demand space, but to build something that would make her presence undeniable, something that would not require permission, something that would not rely on anyone else's definition of authority. And now here she was, not at the end of the table, not waiting, but standing at the center of a system she had reshaped. The memory did not soften her, it sharpened her, it clarified exactly why this moment mattered. She turned back to the manager, her expression calm but resolute. "You asked who I called," she said, her voice steady. "I called the system that answers to me." The manager swallowed, a small movement, but one that revealed the shift more clearly than anything else. His eyes flicked once more to the phone, to the live update still moving across the screen, access levels continuing to change, permissions recalibrating in real time. "This is not a glitch," he said quietly, more to himself now than to her. Angela gave a slight nod, acknowledging the realization without emphasizing it. "No," she replied, "it is a correction." The words settled into the room, firm, precise, not emotional, just accurate. Outside, the guard stood near the access panel, his badge still in hand, but no longer trying to force it to work. His stance had changed, no longer defensive, no longer assertive, just still, watching, understanding that whatever authority he thought he had was never his to begin with. Inside, the manager looked at Angela again, and this time, there was no dismissal, no assumption. Only the weight of recognition arriving too late. Angela picked up her phone once more, her movements controlled, deliberate. She tapped the screen again, and as she did, another quiet shift rippled through the system, one that would not just affect this floor, but everything connected to it. She met his gaze one final time in that moment, her voice calm, unwavering. "You did not deny me access," she said, "you revealed who never had it." The system did not stop after her last command, it accelerated, like something that had been waiting for permission to correct itself. The dashboard on her phone continued to update in real time, lines of access shifting, permissions recalibrating with quiet precision, and across the executive floor, the effects became impossible to ignore. Doors that once opened without question now remained closed. Badges that once granted silent authority now returned nothing, not even error, just absence. And that absence carried more weight than rejection ever could, because it meant the system no longer recognized them at all. Inside the boardroom the manager stood still, watching the updates reflect in the glass surface of the table, his reflection fragmented by the data he could not control. "What are you doing?" he asked, but the question no longer demanded an answer, it acknowledged one already in motion. Angela did not look away from the screen, her eyes tracking the changes. With calm focus, restoring alignment, she said, her voice steady, as if describing something routine, something necessary. Outside the room a senior executive attempted to re-enter his office, his badge tapping twice against the panel before he stepped back, confusion tightening his expression. "It is not working," he said to no one in particular, and the statement echoed down the corridor, picked up by others who were experiencing the same quiet denial. The guard near the elevator lowered his hand slowly, his badge no longer raised, his posture no longer assertive. He had stopped trying, because it was no longer a matter of effort, it was a matter of authority, and that had already shifted. Inside, the manager shook his head slightly, as if rejecting what he was seeing. "You cannot just remove access like this," he said, but even as he spoke, his voice lacked conviction. Because the evidence was unfolding around him, undeniable. Angela finally lifted her gaze from the phone and met his eyes. "I am not removing access," she replied calmly, "I am revoking what was never granted correctly." The distinction landed, sharp and precise, cutting through the last fragments of misunderstanding. The manager exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping just enough to reveal the weight settling in. "This will shut down operations," he said, and for the first time, there was no challenge in his tone, only consequence. Angela gave a slight nod, acknowledging the truth without hesitation. For a moment, she said, so it can function correctly again. The room held that statement, absorbing it. Outside the boardroom the junior analyst stepped forward again, her voice steadier now. System notice just came through, she said, holding her phone slightly raised. All executive access is under review, temporary suspension in effect. The words spread quickly, not loudly, but clearly. Each person hearing it adjusting their understanding in real time. Inside, the manager closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, looking at Angela not as an interruption, not as a disruption, but as the source of something far larger than the situation he thought he was managing. And what happens to us? He asked quietly, the question stripped of ego now, stripped of assumption. Angela paused for a fraction of a second, not to hesitate, but to choose precision. Then she answered, her voice calm, unwavering. That depends on whether you were ever supposed to have access. In the first place, the words did not accuse, they evaluated, and in that distinction, the outcome became inevitable. The system continued to update, silent, relentless, and in that silence, one truth settled across the entire floor. Authority had not been taken from them, it had been returned to the only person who ever truly held it. The system slowed just enough for people to see it, not as a glitch, not as a disruption, but as a deliberate process unfolding in real time, and that difference changed everything, because now it was not something to fix, it was something to witness. Inside the boardroom the air felt different, heavier, not with tension, but with clarity, the kind that settles in after confusion has nowhere left to hide. The manager stood there, no longer shifting, no longer searching for control, just watching as the last traces of assumption left the room. You planned this, he said quietly, not accusing, not even questioning, just stating what had become obvious. Angela did not deny it, she did not confirm it either, she simply let the moment speak for itself, because planning was not the point, inevitability was. This was always going to happen, she said, her voice calm, measured. The only variable was when, outside the boardroom the floor had fully transitioned from uncertainty to awareness. Employees no longer attempted to use their badges, they stood in small clusters, watching the system notifications arrive one after another, each message precise, each update final. The guard who had first stopped her now stood near the elevator, his posture neutral, his expression changed, not defensive, not resistant, just aware, as if he had stepped out of a role he did not realize he was playing. Inside, the manager took a slow breath, his eyes moving once more to the phone in Angela's hand, to the dashboard that no longer looked like a tool, but like a command center. You could have told us, he said, and there was no edge in it, just something closer to regret. Angela tilted her head slightly, considering the statement, not dismissing it, but not accepting it either. Would it have changed how you spoke to me? She asked, her tone even, and the question landed without resistance, because the answer was already understood. The manager did not respond, because there was nothing to defend, nothing to justify, just a silence that acknowledged what had been revealed. Angela stepped closer to the table, her presence steady, controlled, the room aligning around her without effort. You saw someone without a badge, she continued, and you decided what that meant. Her voice did not rise, but it carried, filling the space with a clarity that left no room for interpretation. You saw someone who did not match your expectation of authority, and you enforced it. The manager lowered his gaze slightly, not in defeat, but in recognition, because now it was no longer about the system, it was about the moment that triggered it, the decision that set everything in motion. Angela reached for her phone again, her movements precise, intentional. She tapped once more, and as she did, a final update appeared across the dashboard, the last phase of the audit completing, access levels locked, permissions finalized. The process was no longer active, it was complete. She turned the screen toward him one last time, not to prove anything, but to close the loop. This is not about punishment, she said, her voice steady, it is about correction. The word settled, final, leaving no space for argument. Outside the boardroom a soft tone echoed across the floor, different from the earlier alerts, cleaner, resolved. The system had finished. Inside, the manager looked at her, truly looked this time, not through assumption, not through role, but through understanding, and in that moment, something shifted. Again, not in the system, not in the building, but in the space between them. Angela picked up her phone, her posture unchanged, her presence still anchored, and as she turned slightly toward the door, she spoke one last time in that moment, her voice calm, unwavering. "Authority is not something you assign," she said, "it is something you recognize," and with that, the silence that followed was no longer uncertain, it was resolved. Because the system had not just been corrected, it had revealed exactly who it was built to serve. The silence that followed did not feel empty, it felt earned, like the room itself had reached a conclusion it could not undo. Angela stepped toward the boardroom door without urgency, without hesitation, her movement steady, controlled, and as she crossed back into the executive floor, the atmosphere shifted again, not with tension, but with recognition. The people who had been watching did not scatter, did not pretend to return to their routines, they stood where they were, eyes following her, not out of curiosity anymore, but out of understanding. The guard straightened slightly as she approached, not in defense, not in authority, but in something closer to respect. His hand no longer hovered near his badge, it rested at his side, still, acknowledging what had already been made clear. Angela did not stop in front of him, but she did slow just enough for the moment to register, not as a confrontation, but as a transition. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again, because there was nothing left to say that had not already been revealed. She moved past him, her heels quiet against the floor, and for the first time since she arrived, no one stepped in her path, no one questioned her direction, no one asked for credentials. The system no longer needed to prove anything, and neither did she. Behind her the manager remained near the boardroom entrance, his posture no longer commanding, his presence no longer central. He watched as the space he thought he controlled reorganized itself without him, and in that observation, something settled, not defeat, but clarity, the kind that arrives when resistance no longer makes sense. Across the floor, access panels began to change again, but this time the response was different, not denial, not absence, but selective restoration. A green light flashed for some, steady and clear, while others remained unchanged, silent, unresolved. The distinction was precise, intentional, and everyone could see it. The junior analyst glanced down at her badge, then back at the panel beside her, and when she lifted it to scan, the reader responded immediately, a clean confirmation. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, not in relief, but in understanding, because it was no longer about access being returned. It was about access being defined correctly. Near the conference room, another employee attempted the same. But the panel remained unresponsive, and this time, there was no confusion, no repeated attempts, just acceptance, because the system had already answered. Angela reached the center of the executive floor once more, the space that had once resisted her now aligned around her without question. She paused there, just for a moment, not to assert presence, but to acknowledge the shift, the glass walls, the silent offices, the controlled environment that once relied on invisible rules now reflected something else entirely, something visible, something undeniable. She turned slightly, her gaze moving across the people gathered, not addressing them directly, but including them in the moment, her voice calm, measured, carried just enough to be heard without effort. "This floor was never restricted," she said, "it was mismanaged." The word settled across the space, not as a reprimand, but as a correction, a statement that reframed everything that had happened. Behind her the manager lowered his gaze briefly, not out of shame, but out of recognition, because now the issue was no longer whether he had made a mistake, it was understanding the weight of it. Angela's phone remained in her hand, the screen dimmed now, the process complete, no more updates, no more changes, just a system restored to its intended design. She looked once more toward the elevator, then back across the floor, her presence steady, composed, and in that moment, there was nothing left to prove, nothing left to correct, only one final truth that remained, quiet but absolute. She had not taken control of the space, she had revealed that it had always been hers. The floor no longer felt like a place that needed supervision, it felt like a system that had finally aligned with its own design, and in that alignment, every movement became quieter, more intentional, as if the building itself had recalibrated its understanding of who held authority within it. Angela remained where she was for a moment longer, not to linger, but to allow the shift to settle fully, because correction was not just about action, it was about recognition, and recognition took time. Across the executive floor employees began to move again, but differently now, not with the same automatic confidence, not with the same assumed access, but with awareness. Each step measured against something newly understood. The guard near the elevator glanced down at his badge, then back at the panel, but he did not attempt to scan it, not yet, because this was no longer about testing the system, it was about respecting it. The manager finally stepped forward from the boardroom, his pace slower than before, his presence no longer leading the space, but re-entering it. He looked around at the employees, at the panels, at the quiet order that had replaced the earlier disruption, then his gaze returned to Angela, and for the first time, there was no attempt to speak over her, no attempt to redirect the moment, only a pause, deliberate, respectful, as if choosing his words now required understanding rather than authority. "What happens next?" he asked, his voice lower, steadier, stripped of everything it carried before. Angela turned slightly toward him, her expression composed, not distant, not harsh, just clear. "Now the system runs as it was meant to," she replied, her tone even, and the answer did not expand, it did not justify, it simply existed as fact. The manager nodded once, slowly, absorbing it, because there was nothing to argue with, nothing to challenge, only something to accept. Nearby, the junior analyst stepped back from the panel she had successfully accessed earlier, her posture more upright now, not from confidence alone, but from clarity, because she understood something she had not before, that access was not just about clearance, it was about alignment, and alignment had just been restored. A quiet tone echoed again through the floor, not an alert, not a warning, but a confirmation, subtle, final, the last system message completing its cycle. Angela glanced briefly at her phone, the screen now still, no more updates, no more adjustments, the process was complete. She slipped it back into her coat pocket, the movement simple, unannounced. But it marked the end of something significant. She took a step toward the elevator, not rushed, not delayed. Just forward, and as she approached, the panel lit up before she even reached it, responding not to proximity alone, but to recognition. The doors slid open smoothly, without hesitation, without delay. The guard stepped aside instinctively, not out of obligation, but out of understanding, giving space where it was due. Angela paused just at the threshold, turning slightly, not to address the entire floor, but to leave something behind, something that would remain long after she was gone. Her voice calm, steady, carried just enough to reach those still watching. "Access is not a privilege," she said, "it is a reflection of truth." The words settled into the space, not loud, not forceful, but undeniable. The manager lowered his gaze slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement, because now the meaning was clear. Angela stepped into the elevator, the doors closing softly behind her, and as they did, the executive floor remained, quiet, controlled, but no longer the same, because what had happened there was not just a correction of systems, it was a correction of perception, and that kind of change did not reset, it remained, embedded in every access point, every decision, every moment that would follow. The elevator doors closed with a quiet finality, not dramatic, not abrupt, just precise, like everything else that had happened, and as the car began its descent, the executive floor above did not return to what it had been, because it could not. Something fundamental had shifted, something that could not be undone by routine or time. Inside the elevator Angela stood alone, her reflection faint against the brushed steel walls, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, as if the moment that had just unfolded was not extraordinary, but necessary. She did not check her phone, did not revisit the system she had just corrected, because she already knew the outcome. Outside, 30 floors above, the silence lingered longer than expected, not because people did not know what to do, but because they now understood that how they did it mattered. The manager remained near the center of the floor, his position no longer defined by authority, but by awareness. He looked around at the employees, at the access panels, at the quiet order that had replaced assumption, and for the first time, he did not give instructions, he observed. Because the system no longer needed direction, it needed understanding. The guard stepped toward the panel again, but this time his movement was slower, deliberate, not testing, but acknowledging. He lifted his badge, paused for a brief second, then scanned it. The reader responded with a clear green light, steady, confirmed. He exhaled softly, not in relief, but in recognition, because now he knew that access was not something he carried, it was something he was trusted with. Across the floor, others experienced the same. Some panels responded, others remained still, and no one questioned it anymore. No one argued, no one tried to override it, because the system had already spoken. and its answer was final. The junior analyst returned to her desk, her movements quieter, more focused, her understanding deeper than it had been an hour before. She glanced once toward the boardroom, then back to her screen, not distracted, but grounded, because she had witnessed something that would shape every decision she made. Moving forward, the manager finally took a step forward, then another, his path no longer uncertain, but intentional. He stopped near the glass wall overlooking the city, the skyline stretching out beyond it, steady, unchanged, yet somehow different, because his perspective had shifted, not forced, not demanded, but revealed. He spoke, not loudly, not to command attention, but to mark the moment. "We move forward," he said, and the words did not carry the same authority as before, but they carried something else, something more grounded, more aware, and that made them stronger. Back in the elevator, Angela stepped out into the lower lobby, the space open, bright, filled with movement that felt untouched by what had happened above. She walked forward without pause, blending into the rhythm of the building she owned, not needing acknowledgement, not seeking recognition, because her presence was not defined by who saw her, but by what she had built. She passed through the lobby doors, the city outside moving at its usual pace, unaware of the correction that had just taken place above it, and as she stepped onto the sidewalk, she did not look back, not because it did not matter, but because it no longer needed her attention. The system was aligned, the truth was visible, and the lesson remained where it belonged, not in a speech, not in a report, but in a moment that could not be forgotten. Because in the end, she did not raise her voice, she did not argue, she did not demand respect. She let the system speak, and when it did, it said everything they needed to understand: that power does not announce itself, it reveals itself, and once it does not need to be defended again.